Hey guys, welcome to Combat Kettlebell. Intro number 4, the fundamental human movements. So now we're going to talk about the fundamental human movements without the presence of a bell because we want you to be moving correctly and in the right patterns. That way you're going to get the most out of the exercises. So the fundamental human movements that humans can do are the squat motion, where you're throwing the hips back and bringing the knees apart, squat nice and deep. Okay, so a squat, it's predominantly quad driven, so it's a lot of knee bend activity. The second one that we're going to talk about is the hip hinge. So it's a hip dominant motion where we're predominantly just using the hips to move the torso up and down. Now notice when I do the hip hinge, I'm not allowing my back to flex and extend. That's a different type of movement. We want to keep the back nice and stable while we do our hip hinge. We want to throw our hips back. So imagine putting your hands on the crest of your hips and then pushing your bum back to a wall and then coming up. Notice that my knees, they're slightly bent, but they're not fully locked out either, right? We're trying to isolate the hips entirely with just soft knees as we go into our hip hinge. This is a tough movement for a lot of people to get into, so if you have trouble with it, we're gonna do some drills later. If you position yourself next to a wall and then try to touch your bum to the wall each time, that's kind of how you can kind of gauge into that hip hinge and get a little bit more range. Now, we also have the pressing motions. So we have a vertical pressing motion, something where we're pressing our arms up, extended, fully extended up overhead. And we also have the horizontal push where we're doing something like a push-up and then pressing ourselves away from the floor, okay? So we have both vertical and horizontal push. To go along with the push, we also have horizontal and vertical pulls. So now a vertical pull would be something like hanging from a rack and doing a pull-up. Those are a bit tougher moves for most people to grasp just because you're pulling up with all your body weight. The easier version of the pull is the horizontal pull, where you're actually in that hip hinge position and you're pulling a weight to you. So now we'll cover the specifics when we get into actual exercises, but I just want you to know that's what that looks like when we get into it. So now with kettlebells, you're also using a lot of rotational movements. So things where we're actually rotating through the body, which we'll have some drills that'll go through rotational movements in at the hips and the arms. Finally, we come into flexion and extension type exercises. So excuse me, exercises that involve both bending at the spine and then extending at the spine. So you'll see some of those ones in things like a sit-up. A sit-up is a nice flexion exercise for the abdominals and the hip flexors, where we're coming all the way up into hip and abdominal flexion, and then you can see some back extension exercises like Superman, where you're bringing everything up and coming in to extension with the back. So you won't find too much flexion and extension in kettlebell movements, predominantly because most of the time we're trying to keep our core rigid. That way we can transfer force more effectively. So now a couple of the drills that we can walk through are the squat hip hinge and a lunge position, which is a modified squat position. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna position our feet shoulder width apart, throw our hips back, bring our knees apart, and then we're just gonna bang out squats, okay? We're gonna go about 20 reps, just so you get used to going that far along. So now for some of you, this might actually be a workout. For other of you, this is a good little warm-up, just to kind of get your joints and hips moving in the right direction. So now, you want to try to get as deep as you can into the squat while transitioning out. So think about bringing your bum in between your knees and push those knees out to the side with your hips. Bring them apart, that way you can get all the way down there. Okay? Go ahead and do about 20 reps of that one, and then we're going to go right into our hip hinge. Feet shoulder width apart. We're just going to throw our hips back and slide your hands down to your knees or your shins, as low as you can go. Try to feel the hamstrings tighten up at the bottom. Keep your lower back tight and braced. A little bit of tension on the abdominals. That way you can get in and out of those positions easily. And you can kind of feel the difference in between those two movements. Now make sure that as you're sliding your hands, you're not bending your knees too far, otherwise it's going to look like this. Okay? Just slide your hands down, push your hips back. About 20 of those bad boys. And then we'll work into a lunge position. Okay? So now a lunge position, we're going to take a nice exaggerated step. something that you wouldn't generally do unless you're actually trying to hit this position. So a larger than normal step. And then you're just gonna bring the knee down to the ground and then transition on the way up. Okay? So we take a large step forward, drop the back knee, push it away, and then step back up into the original position. Okay? So we can go both forward and backward in our lunges. We can go side to side. They all have the same mechanics. Basically a large step, bring the knee down, brace, keep the torso upright, push yourself back up into the standing position. Now you want to make sure that when you're doing your lunges, you're bracing that front foot into the floor. You're rooted into that floor, okay? So you take a step, you brace, bring the knee down, then push back up, okay? Notice there's not a lot of forward lean when I'm doing my lunges. I'm trying to keep my core erect as I'm doing my lunge. That way I can transfer force. If I have a bell, I can bring it up, clean it up, press, and maneuver out of that. But you need a nice stable position in order to do that, okay? So we're gonna go ahead and bang out 10 of those as we go. Just kind of get the hips nice and warmed up. And you can alternate, you can stay on the same leg for 10, doesn't matter. Your arm position, you just let your arms hang free. You can bring them out for more balance, you can bring them up. So there's many different patterns that you can do from these fundamental movements. But from these positions, we'll be able to hit all the things we want into the bell. Okay, so we got about 10 on one side, let's do 10 on the other side. And then just work it through. Remember, take the time to plant that front foot and then bring the knee down. You don't have to go all the way to the ground, just get about an inch and hover. And then transition upward. So a lot of people make the mistake of trying to go too fast into the lunge and they rush into it and end up putting a lot of stress on that front knee. That's why we plant the front foot and then we transition all that force down. That way your muscles are absorbing the force and not your joints. Whew, all right, so, but this time you should be sweating a little bit and we're gonna get into our overhead pressing motions. Now we're not gonna use a bell right now. Right now, all we're gonna do is act like we have our hands into the rack position. Okay, so thumbs into the throat, okay? Palms are toward one another. We're gonna bring our hands out and then straight up in the air, okay? So you'll notice that my biceps are almost by my ear. I'm straight stacked on top of my skeleton. My shoulder blades are down. I'm gonna come back, bring my elbows in, clasp my hands together, okay? This is the exact position that you want for transferring the bell into the overhead position. So you're gonna swing out, like opening and closing a barn door, press straight up, bring it back, swing in, swing out, press up, come back, okay? Now you'll notice that my palms rotate from being up here to bring out, okay? So that's what we want. We want to come in, act like you're praying, bring your hands out, press, okay? And once you get the rhythm of that, you can do it fast, and you get that little bit of rotation out of the shoulders, okay? So we'll do about 10 reps there. And then we will switch into a pressing motion. So vertical pressing motions, that's what we just did. Now we're gonna do a horizontal pressing motion. So we're gonna stick our hands on the ground. We're gonna pack our shoulders in, so pull the shoulders back, chest up and out. Extend the feet, and then we're just gonna bang out some push-ups. So probably one of the easiest exercises, but it's hard for some of you. So if you need to go to your knees on this one. Make sure those shoulder blades are set in the back. So you're pulling the shoulder blades back, chest is up and out. We've got our hands down from the shoulders, okay? So your optimal pressing angle is going to be here, somewhere in this range, okay? If your hands are up here, your shoulders are unstable. It's not gonna be a good feeling. You're just gonna end up burning up the shoulder joint and you're gonna eventually experience pain in that shoulder. So even if they're tough, bring them down here. That way you get the most out of the pressing exercises. So now for a pull-up type pattern, you're gonna need either a pull-up rack for this one. Now most people are gonna have a tough time with pull-ups anyway. So, but the basic pattern is going to be grabbing onto the bar, pulling the shoulder blades down, and driving the elbows, okay? So each time, I don't want my shoulder blades to be sagging up, I want them tucked in, and then pull, okay? So this is the key element that most people need to realize when they're going to do a pull-up. So we're gonna go over and bang out a couple pull-ups in between. So get our grip, pack in the shoulders, pull out. Now, if you don't have a pull-up rack, I highly suggest you get either a door frame pull-up or something that you can hang off to, like a rafter or something like that. They have really cheap bars that you can get. This one will be a mainstay in the overall combat kettlebell program because it's really one of the only ways that you can get a vertical pull-up. And we'll chat more about those when we get into them into the actual workout. Now for a horizontal rowing motion, basically what we want to do is slide our hands down the legs, stick the bum out, get the back nice and tight, and then we're just going to drive the elbows back and squeeze, okay? This is our horizontal rowing motion, okay? Whether we go one arm or two arms. We can change the stances into a split stance and do the same sort of rowing motion with one arm as we did with two, okay? So right now, we're just in a shoulder width stance with our hips back. We're just driving those elbows back and squeezing our shoulder blades nice and tight. We're pulling them right next to the ribs and getting a nice solid back contraction out there. You want to try to identify those back muscles back there that you're working. So imagine you're opening and closing a book and squeezing your shoulder blades. That's going to be fundamental for every sort of pulling motion that you do. Whew. Finally, we get into the rotational motions. So for a rotational motion, we're just going to do a little body weight chop. Okay? So we're going to clasp our hands together and we're going to do this swivel motion with our hips. Notice as I pivot, I'm shifting my weight to one side and then planting the foot on one side and then pivoting on the toe on the other side. Get a nice chopping motion with my upper body. Notice I'm not folding over, I'm not releasing my back, I'm not going into flexion and extension. My torso is rotating around a pole as I do these. Okay, I'm just going to switch directions here. You'll notice a lot of transference in between here and something like a golf swing or a baseball swing. Same sort of patterning. Now we're just going back and forth. It's a little bodyweight chop. I'm making a nice cross pattern with my arms. I'm rotating through my hips and in through the torso. Okay? Now notice we can change this up to where we go horizontal or parallel to the floor as I'm rotating. Same sort of patterning. Okay. I can swing one way and bring my arms down and just get a feel for how that feels to rotate around the hips. This is key to save your lower back. If you're not rotating it through at the hips, you're not able to transfer force correctly and you're going to injure your lower back. So those of you that are dancers, just think of it like a dance move. Dancing all day, all night. Good, nice. Okay, so we've covered some of the fundamental movement patterns. Hope that makes you more aware. So when we hit those patterns when we're exercising, you'll know what they are. So you can go through the drills again, the squat, the hip hinge, the lunge, overhead press, push-ups, the pull-up pattern, and rows. Oh, and also the bodyweight chop, just to get a feel for the motion. Now you should be sweating a little bit if you followed along. We'll get ready for an actual workout next. See you soon.